Hi, everybody. It's Susan here, and this time we're having a look at Mars, just about to go into Cancer very shortly after we have Pluto going into Aquarius. 2 days later, Mars goes into a new sign after 7 months of being in Gemini. And I wanted to mark this occasion because 7 months is a long time to have the same kind of Mars energy. The dates are the 25th of March and until the 20th of May. So by the time Mars actually leaves Cancer, Jupiter will already be in Taurus. So Mars is ruling Jupiter until about the 16th of May, when it then finally goes into Taurus. So we have to consider that energy of Mars in Cancer, applying that to all the planets that we find in Aries, because of course Mars is ruling all of the Aries energy here from the sign of Cancer. So Mars will travel through a sign at least once every 2 years. And so we're also going to have Mars in Cancer retrograding the next time Mars goes through Cancer. And that's going to be from the 4th of September, 2024, until the 4th of November, 2024. Then it'll move into Leo and retrograde back into Cancer from the 6th of January all the way through the 18th of April 2025. So we've got a lot of Mars in Cancer energy coming up over the next couple of years, and it would be really good to take good notes and reflect on what's been going on, both personally and then collectively, of course, now while Mars is going through Cancer in the next 7 weeks or so. So we will take a look sign by sign at where Cancer is in each chart for the sun, moon, and rising signs. But before I do that, I just want to mention a few things about this Mars in Cancer. The first is that at the ingress chart, which tells us a lot about the quality of a planet, it's like the birth chart, let's say, for the transit. In the ingress chart, we have Mars squaring the sun, which it's ruling in this chart. So of course, when the sun is in Aries, it's an exalted sun ruled by Mars. That makes for a very strong and impactful square. And of course, this is going to be something that we will feel quite dramatically globally. Ruled by Mars in Cancer, which is actually not in a very powerful position. It's considered to be in its debilitation because Mars is exalted in Capricorn. That doesn't mean good or bad. I really want to emphasize that. Often people think exaltation means it's great and debilitation means it's awful. What that means is that a planet in its exaltation tends to work more in harmony with the actual theme of the planet or the original energy of the planet. In this case, in Capricorn, Mars is very determined and it's very ambitious, and those are qualities that Mars really stands for. In Cancer, Mars is much more hesitant. It's a much more internalized energy, much more emotional. Mars likes to keep moving forward, just like the energy of Aries. And in Cancer, there's a whole lot of sidestepping. There's a whole lot of coming and going because Mars is in Cancer ruled by the moon, which makes it fluctuate. It makes the energy change regularly, like literally every 2.5 days. Mars energy is going to be affected by the ruler of Cancer, which is the moon. And so here at the very beginning of this ingress, we find that the moon itself. So here at the time of the Mars ingress, we find that the moon is in Taurus in its exaltation, speaking of exaltation, and that means that the moon has a certain stable energy that is a much more grounded emotional energy than usual. However, that sign of Taurus is representing all things to do with money and values and the earth itself and agriculture and all of the things that sustain us. Now, the ruler of that moon is in the same sign. So again, very powerful. In the sign of rulership, we have Venus. And so that is also helping the moon find good dignity. And that means that there's a certain amount of help, let's say, from the rulership to Mars. But it's nonetheless still in this square to the sun. And so that's going to be quite impulsive. It's going to be energy that can be unpredictable. It's certainly going to be dynamic, of course, remembering that what Mars stands for is our ego drives, if you like. It's what makes us take action. It's what gets us out of bed in the morning. It's what motivates you in general. And then, of course, that can also be aggression, and it can also be things that are related to war and military. We also have a very strong trine from Mars to Saturn. And this is actually really helpful. It gets stuff done. We like Mars trining Saturn because it's very grounded, it's very supportive of long-term commitment, long-term action. It gives it a kind of a stick-to-itiveness that is really powerful. Mars trine Saturn people are very powerfully motivated people. And it gives that kind of gung-ho energy to the quality of Mars here, keeping in mind that it is still, of course, in a square to the sun. So there can be, again, military, aggressive, potentially impulsive energy that we need to contend with. That, of course, is global, and it, of course, also represents where we find these placements in the chart. As always, it's always going to refer back to what is happening in the chart. So we have a semi-sextile also between Saturn and that sun. And so again, it looks like there's some kind of tension between past and future. Aries wanting to go, 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 something new, something different. Let's do this now. And Saturn reflective, much more considered in the sign of Pisces on top of that. And so there's quite a lot of a sense of what is the bigger picture? What are the bigger picture consequences of all of this action? And then, of course, that Mars as well is in conjunct, or what's also called a quincunx to Pluto, which has only just now entered into Aquarius. So all this to say that there's quite a lot of tension around the time of this ingress. The tension seems to be with regards to how we want to show up and take initiatives. The sun is representing our life goals and purpose, let's say. And so, of course, as we go through the charts one by one, you're going to find the different areas of life that this will affect you personally. So, keeping in mind that Mars rules not only Aries, but also Scorpio. I prefer to work with the traditional rulerships. And the next two eclipses are coming up in the sign of Aries and in the sign of Scorpio. So this Mars in Cancer is also going to be ruling the eclipse, the new moon eclipse that is happening in Aries at the last degree of Aries and roughly conjunct Jupiter. And of course, keeping in mind that the nodes are out of the alignment. So we have the new moon in Aries itself, but the nodes are still in the axis of Taurus and Scorpio. So Mars is ruling the south node as well. So very, very powerful at the time of the eclipse. And of course, I'm preparing a video on that eclipse, which I'll release shortly. And so we also have another eclipse coming up. And of course, we also have another eclipse 2 weeks later, because eclipses always happen in pairs or sometimes in triplets. So we have the lunar eclipse that's coming up on the 5th of May. Of course, we want to always track where the moon is. Eclipses are always gauged on where the moon is, not where the sun is. And so with the lunar eclipse, we find that in the sign of Scorpio at between 14 and 15 degrees. So once again, we have a Mars-ruled eclipse, and very, very powerful with Mars ruling both the moon and the south node. And this time the nodes are being squared by Pluto. So this is a really powerful season, a very powerful eclipse season. And again, I will produce a separate video on that lunar eclipse so we can look at that more in detail. So let's take a closer look at what Mars in Cancer represents here at the time of this ingress. So while Mars is in Cancer, we tend to act a little defensively. There can be a lot of emotionality. It'll depend very much on your natal Mars, and it will depend very much on the house where we find Cancer in your chart. So this will not necessarily apply equally to everyone, but just keeping in mind that Mars is really about this strong motivational energy. And Cancer, although it's a cardinal sign and very highly driven, very highly ambitious and motivated, can also be extremely emotional and acting from emotions. And so the impulsive actions of Mars can be driven by emotions, and this can lead to some irrational, again, impulsive action. It can be something that we might regret. This can also lead to an action that feels like you're unable to really reach out, you're unable to really accomplish what it is that you want because something feels like it's being held back, something feels like it's not something's not working for you. So this energy of Mars in Cancer can have us feeling a little bit emotional and insecure around certain things and extra sensitive perhaps and changeable, unpredictable. But it can also be something that we can use in terms of standing up for ourselves, standing up for women, standing up for the nation. This is one of the things that concerns me a wee bit about this Mars squaring the Sun. And especially if we go, let's say, to the US chart, I'll just come back to that, to the Sibley chart. So we've got Mars has just been, now we'll add the transits here. Mars has just been in the sign of Gemini forever, and it's now going to be, so it's already crossed and returned to the USA Mars. And it's also now going to go into the eighth house, and it's going to be crossing all of the planets in the USA eighth house. Mars in Cancer on a national level can be extremely jingoistic. It can be extremely nationalistic. It's like the warrior that fights for home and hearth or nation and flag. And this is already a very strong flag loving nation. And so here we have this Mars, which is in conjunct the Pluto in its third house of commerce, the third house of business exchanges, commercial exchanges, information, technology, and so on. And so I'm not feeling so comfortable about this. I think that the next 7 weeks or so, with Mars going through the US eighth house, is going to show up quite a lot of issues around money, around exchanges. We're seeing that dramatically already. That was definitely already the case while Mars was in conjunct Pluto natally, the natal US Pluto. This is an energy for me that suggests that there's going to be quite a lot of issues in the next 7 weeks around loans and money that is owed, around shared resources of all kinds, whatever those resources might be. And this, of course, is the house of intrigue. It's the eighth house of deep, hidden things, things that are not necessarily out in the open, not clear. And so we're seeing, I think, quite a lot of pressure on the US. Mars, of course, crossing Jupiter and Venus very, very soon after it ingresses is, of course, related to the economy. And so when Mars crosses over the Sun, this is something that can actually relate to issues that are to do with identity, what the nation considers is important to its identity, to its sense of being. And this is a period of time around, if I go back, we're getting kind of close to the exact, let's say, and look what the date is. It's actually exactly at the time of the eclipse. So I think there can be some real aggravation amongst our American friends. And here we also have Venus that's just gone over the conjunction with Uranus. That I think the economy is going to be in really, really rough shape now. I mean, you don't need to be a genius to see that this is happening already, but I'm just showing astrologically where this is already showing up quite significantly, and that's also building in the year 2023 when we're going to see Chiron returning to the natal Chiron for, I don't know, like the fifth time, maybe fifth time, I suppose, in the nation's lifetime. Right. And one I wanted to show you as well, and I know some of you don't like this stuff, and I know some of you do like this stuff, so just bear with me. If you don't like it, you can skip ahead. The chapters are indicated. I wanted to just point out what was going on with France as well. So here we have the Republic of France on the inside, and we have the transits on the outside. Now, interestingly, you will probably already have heard this. If you're very interested in the Pluto movements right now into Aquarius, you will have heard it a lot because Pluto was in Aquarius in the intervening years between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and it was still in Aquarius during the French Revolution. And so here we have, as Pluto is on the threshold, this is today as I'm recording this, 22nd of March, as Pluto is on the threshold at the 29th degree, about to move in to the 11th house, which is the house of the people, the proletariat, as it were. In Aquarius, we're going to see then an intensification of that revolutionary energy. And lo and behold, last week, we had members of the French legislature standing up in opposition to legislation that Macron is trying to push through about raising the retirement age, which has caused an enormous uproar in a country that, by the way, is used to uproar. This is with the Aries ascendant, Ketu on the ascendant, And this is a country that just absolutely loves to go down to the manifestation and do their protesting for pretty much any reason is good. But it's been quite violent this time, and we've seen quite a lot of energy in Aries. So there's been quite a lot of stimulus there, quite a lot of aggravation in the third house of communication and commerce and money and etc., where they already have a Mars placement, but the Mars has been going back and forth over that, and of course, responsible for that first house, as well as the eighth house, where we've been seeing all of the action of the eclipses. Now, if I come back to my point about Pluto, the legislature, several members of the French legislature got up and started singing La Marseillaise in the French Assemblée Nationale, and the Marseillaise is literally the national anthem about taking up arms. And so this is, I found incredibly symbolic. Just after the members of the Legislative Assembly sang out the Marseillaise, then Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is a left-wing leader in France, took a whole bunch of people, all the demonstrators, the people in opposition, to the Place de la Concorde, which is exactly where the guillotine were set up during the revolution. And this is, of course, where the monarch Louis the 16th was killed, along with many members of his family. And he said he wanted to do that to revive the regicidal instincts of the crowd. So here we are on the verge of Pluto going into Aquarius in the 11th house of people in the chart of the French Republic, which is this is the most recent one. General de Gaulle established a fifth republic because it had been so diminished after the Second World War. There was a need for a reestablishment of government and a reestablishment of a legislature and so on in a modern way. And so we used the chart of 1958, 6th of October, to establish what is modern France. But nonetheless, this has enormous repercussions for the French history. Pluto is already, in fact, trining that Mars. There's going to be quite a hairy spring up ahead. This is going to be 2 years, in fact, 2023 and 2024, where we're going to see quite a lot of messiness amongst the French as they get their regicidal instincts going. So we're actually here to talk about Mars in Cancer. Let's just have a look at Mars goes into Cancer, where it's going to go. It's going into the house of the roots of the nation, the people, the sense of what makes them happy, what makes them feel secure. And wouldn't you know it, Mars is going to go through there and shake all of that up. And now, of course, they do have a dignified moon in its rulership in Cancer. And so the French like their comforts. The French like their early retirement. They like their 35-hour work week. They like their good food. They like their terroir and everything that goes with the wonders that we all admire of France. And so when Mars goes through that, people are not going to be very happy. There's going to be strife at home. This is what Mars in the fourth can tell us. There can be strife, let's say, in an individual's chart, that can be around emotions and in some ways psychological issues. But of course, if we're looking at a nation's chart, this is where the people are feeling threatened, where the people are feeling that there's instability. And so where, this is where we find Mars for the next 7 weeks till the 20th of May. So again, I'll touch on this in another video. I'm really keen to do a video on what is going on with a number of nations at this time, and find out what's going on around the world, because there's just so much change that is affecting very important nations around the world in significant ways that are going to be changing things long term. Right, let's get back to where we're supposed to be, which is this Mars at the ingress of Cancer. And so I wanted to also touch on the nakshatras, because as Mars moves into Cancer, just on the very first day, so really only on the 25th and just maybe a little bit into the 26th of March, we have Mars ruled by Kritika. So we want to also, we don't have to go into this each time, but Mars, when we follow the moon and the nakshatras that the moon is in, will also change in the qualities of the nakshatra. So not just the sign, but the nakshatra. This happens to be a moon in Kritika nakshatra, which is a really strong, motivating energy. It's very inspirational. It's really good for whatever action is required right now. So keep that in mind for yourself, particularly. keep that in mind for where Taurus is in your chart, and using that inspiration, using that enthusiasm, apply that to the Mars. And then we find that Mars is very quickly then going into Ardra Nakshatra. So Ardra Nakshatra is about a destroyer of whatever is false or evil or deceitful. With Mars there, it's about fearlessness. It's an opposition to power or in defiance of any injustice. And it's not just opposing power in a way that is like a rebel without a cause. It's really about opposition to what is wrong. And it's also opposition to lies. It's really a truth-seeking energy. Now that applies to Ardra Nakshatra in general, and when Mars is there, that works really well. So the Mars there is really very clear, very direct, and very motivated to do all of those things. And so keep that in mind, because that's going to continue up until the 22nd of April, when Mars then goes in Punarvasu Nakshatra. So that is about it's the potential is to be getting into a rut or trying how can you get out of a rut. It's about issues that can lead you to feel stubborn or dig in your heels in a way that's not necessarily constructive for you or for other people. But it's also both simultaneously or either or, again, that depends on a lot of other issues in your chart. That can be a very strong desire for renewal, for something to start over, start afresh. And so just keep in mind that, if you want to leave something behind or you need to reinvent something, if you haven't fully understood it, if you haven't fully ingested that and digested that, then you're just going to be bringing that with you into whatever your next adventure is. So make sure that you get it, make sure that you understand what it is that you are aiming for, what it is that you want to reach out into with this Mars here in Cancer, because then on the 16th of May, Mars is going to be moving into Pushya Nakshatra. So it's only going to be in Cancer for 4 days of that time. And then the next couple of weeks, it's actually going to be in Leo, in tropical Leo, while it's in Pushya Nakshatra. So in that energy, at the end of the sign of Cancer, we want to beware of being overly skeptical of things, so that a healthy skepticism is really good. Being overly skeptical or rejecting good advice, for example, not listening to people who have useful ideas, useful advice for you, or acting out of impatience, acting emotionally, acting out of even a spirit of vengeance potentially, or even worse, avoiding action, avoiding action when it needs to be taken, then this is something that will backfire. And that applies, of course, to each of us, wherever that Cancer is in the late degrees of Cancer, from about 27 degrees of tropical Cancer onwards. But it also, of course, applies internationally. So these things are the things that I'm going to be looking at over the next couple of months. So, learn who is reliable, who's a reliable source, and use discernment, use your wisdom. Don't use emotion to make your decisions. Emotions are um, great for intuiting what you should do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should do the thing at that particular moment. So it's a question of, striking at the right moment, striking while the iron is hot, and is this the good time or not? And so this is the fine balance that we'll find, particularly in the middle of May, almost to the day, in fact, when Jupiter moves into Taurus. So this could be a moment of a better time, let's say, to calmly reflect and to meditate on the things that you really want, and not jump in to new things too quickly, because Jupiter at the end of Aries at that point can also be highly impulsive. So just plan as much as you can. Plan your impulse as much as you can. All right, I think that's enough about this particular chart. I now want to have a look at the sign by sign, and we're going to see how that is applying to all of you individually. Okay, you guessed it, Cancer. It is all about you. Of course, this is happening in your first house. This is quite dynamic, actually. For Cancers, it's not such a bad thing. For those of you who don't have Mars in Cancer natally, this can be really energizing. And again, it depends on the quality of your Mars in your natal chart. But that can actually be quite helpful, because Cancer, especially Cancer rising and moon, can tend to be a little bit self-effacing. And so Mars in Cancer can give you a little bit more of that oomph that you might need to stand up for yourself. And of course, this applies to the ascendant sun and the moon. So in any case, it's going to be helpful. It's going to give you a lot more dynamism. It's a good time to get stuff done. You're going to be really feeling much more ambitious than usual. It can be something that makes you more assertive, but also more aggressive. So you want to balance that out with what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And it's also worth noting that the 10th house for Cancer, which is Aries, and the 5th house, which is Scorpio, is also ruled by this Mars. And so this action that you're going to be taking, what's going on with you, is going to affect your status, your worldly status, your social status, as well as career ideas and what it is that you do in the world. That can be a vocation, doesn't have to be what you're paid for. And the 5th house, which is all about your kids if you have them, or issues around pregnancy if that's a thing that you're thinking about, your creative expression, of course, as well as ideas that might come up around entrepreneurship. For example, if you work for yourself, this will be it'll be very dynamic. It will help you because you're putting a lot of energy into yourself, where Mars is ruling in the chart. And of course, that is also the house of love and love affairs. So that can be quite nice, although that's certainly no guarantee that you're going to just suddenly rock up with a new lover. But if there's somebody there on the horizon, that could be quite nice. It's also a house of gambling, so just beware of that. It's again depends on your nature and your chart, but if Mars is in the first house and you're feeling a little bit like out there, you really want to take a risk, this could be an energy that would be, a good time to try and take a risk and see what might happen. And that doesn't have to be gambling at the blackjack table. It just means, taking a risk. That could be an entrepreneurial risk, for example, especially because Mars is also lighting up that 10th house by square. It's bringing a lot of energy into that 10th house. So while Mars is moving through your first house, you might want to alert your friends and your partner that you might be a little bit on fire in these days, that you might need your own space, that you might prefer, in fact, to do things on your own, be a little bit more independent than usual, and that they might want to pay close attention to the signals that it's time to back off. So just fair warning to those that you might be engaging with. And of course, if this is regarding business, because seventh house, which is opposite yourself, opposite the first house, is also a business house in business partnerships, then that can have you being really driven. And so if you do engage with clients and so on, you might find yourself really out there, really asserting yourself in terms of how you show up for work and what you do day by day. So good luck with all of this, Cancer, and I'll see you in the next video. So Gemini, this is happening in your second house. This is money, 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 money. So this can be something that allows you to generate more wealth, or that you're maybe reflecting on how to organize your money, or what it is that you need to do. How do you need to step up? And this can also be something to do around your values. And so maybe there's a need for you to stand up for your values and the things that you find are very important. There can be something to do with family. So second house can also represent your family. And so this could also be that there's some tension around the family that needs some kind of addressing. And because Mars also rules your 11th house and the 6th house, this is definitely something to do with work and money for you. Because that 11th house is the money that you earn from whatever it is that you do, especially if you are an independent or an entrepreneurial type. Less so if you're an employee, but still, Mars in the second will perhaps have you asking for a pay rise, for example. But the 6th house is also going to be lit up, and the 6th house is your house of everyday work. And so while Mars goes through Cancer for you, this can be an opportunity for you to really improve your work situation, really put a lot of energy into that. And that can bring you some really good results while Mars is here for the next 7 weeks or so. So good luck with all of that, Gemini, and I'll see you in the next video. Taurus, we've got Mars moving through your third house. Now, this is a house of willpower. So it's great having Mars there because it makes you super assertive, gives you a lot of drive and courage. given that the moon ruled Cancer is the sign that is occupying your third house. This is actually a welcome energy for you. It brings you a lot more dynamism than you might normally have. It makes you feel like, now I've got some goals, now I've got some things I'd really like to achieve. I want to get out there. And this could also affect your brothers and sisters, cousins, the people that you might encounter day to day. So that can also have you more engaged with those people. It can, of course, have you in conflict with some of them. So Mars in Cancer, particularly, can be a little bit passive aggressive. And so Mars in the third house can also be pretty sharp with words. It can be pretty sarcastic. Keep an eye on that. So definitely, make sure that you are not burning any bridges by having these kinds of conflicts with the people that you need to be seeing regularly around you. Also, keep in mind that Mars rules your 12th house and your 7th house. So, the 12th house is the area of your unconscious, let's say, psychology or unconscious programming from childhood or, inherited patterns potentially. And so that's something that can have you feeling a little bit aggravated. And equally, this is with regards to the 7th house, where you've got Scorpio, and that Mars is ruling there, and that you already have the South Node going through there. So this could also bring up quite a lot of energy around communicating, around relationships, and through that 12th house connection, maybe understanding your role in having difficulties either in communicating or in relationships in general. So it looks like there's something that can be quite inspiring or motivating with regards to this potential for standing up for yourself or for needing to communicate your truth or clear the air, for example, with siblings or cousins or neighbors even. Just be careful that you don't overdo it because there can be this tendency to be a little bit sharp when Mars is in the third. But if that, of course, is not in your nature, you're not going to suddenly become really sassy. So make the best of this, Taurus, and I'll see you in the next video. Aries, and this is for the sun, moon, and rising. You are ruled by Mars. And so this, of course, is very important for you. Always look where Mars is going. And so you're having this Mars squaring your first house, squaring you from the fourth house. So this is quite significant because it's going to be really felt very strongly. So all of the cardinal signs are going to be feeling this Mars in Cancer very strongly. The fourth house can be issues around your emotional nature. It can be things that make you aggravated, frustrated, needs clearing up or needs addressing in terms of your psychological or just overall mood nature. And so this is something that might be a little testy at home. If you have any challenges at home, it would be very good for you to get out, go for a run, for example, do something physical, take that energy outdoors, take it out of the house for sure. This can also have you feeling like you want to do something about real estate. That could be investing, that could also be renovating. There might be a need to move, and therefore you're having to use that energy to look for a property or look for a new place to live. Because Mars rules your first and eighth house, this could have something to do with relationships, shared resources, the eighth house being marriage partners, potentially people that you might lend money or borrow money from. By the way, don't do that. Don't do that now. Not a good plan. So also the eighth house can also be issues around money that you get from other people. When Mars is concerned, when Mars is in a not such great dignity, it's not likely that that's going to happen for you. So if you are counting on money coming from somebody, that might come with strings attached or with some potential conflict, this is why I say please do not loan or borrow money at this time. Certainly up until the roughly the 20th of May, it would be better if you could avoid that. And then keeping in mind the first house is you, and so with Mars in Cancer, you're perhaps going to be motivated or you'll feel deeply personally impacted by Mars going through the fourth house. That could have you feeling a little bit insecure, that you might feel the need to take action on your psychological state, for example, or what's going on in your family and your emotional life. So it's not such a bad thing. It actually is your ruler, and therefore it's something that will create some dynamism for you. It's not necessarily bad depending on other aspects of your chart, and of course, depending on the transits and where you're experiencing them in other planets of your chart. Nonetheless, I think you can use this energy for personal healing, for working around the home, and for somehow making things the way that you want them in the home front, whether that's psychologically or physically, in terms of what that all feels like and looks like to you. So make the most of this, Aries, with your ruler in the fourth house, and I'll see you in the next video. Pisces, Mars is in Cancer, trining your sign, which is quite supportive, and it's in the fifth house of expression, self expression, creative expression. This is also love affairs, which is kind of fun. And when Mars goes through there, it can be a really dynamic time, very productive. It's very harmonious between the Mars that's in Cancer and your ascendant sun or moon. So, this is a really nice period for you, good energy that you can really max out on in terms of how you might want to show up in business, for example, especially if you have an entrepreneurial bent with Mars going through the fifth, that will really support you. It's fantastic that way. Of course, it's also to do with children. If you have any, or if you're desiring children, then Mars going through there can have you really active around that, but it can also bring some challenges. So, Mars in the fifth house, and also a fifth house ruled by Mars, can often experience difficulties with children or difficulties around the whole process of having children. So be patient if that's the case. Try to understand. Try not to be rash. Try not to jump in too soon to conclusions. Keep a little bit of space if necessary between you and your kids, if that's the issue. And otherwise, you can enjoy that energy, that creative energy. And if you're in the business of producing children at this stage of your life, then that might be a really fun time for you. So Mars rules your second house of money, and it also rules the ninth house. And so Mars in the second, or the energy that's being fed from the fifth back into the second, can really help you gain money. It can be very good for, again, for people, especially in creative enterprises or business enterprises of all kinds. And then because of that trine to the ninth house, this is feeding into the house of your future plans and your sense of purpose in life. It's your higher mind and higher thinking, and maybe a broader perspective on life. So that fifth house creativity can be lighting up that ninth house, potentially also having you interested in traveling or in studying abroad. And this would give you the energy and the creative drive to do something about that. So enjoy this energy, Pisces, because it looks really good for you. And I'll see you in the next video. Aquarius, ascendant and sun and moon, you've got Mars in the sixth house. And so this can be a bit challenging. It can be worth paying attention to your health, for example. You want to make sure that there's no issues, or if there are any issues showing up around your health, that you take care of them, that you take advantage of this energy of Mars going through there to deal with them. Mars can lead to issues around inflammation, potentially even accidents, but of course, that would have to depend on your chart and a number of other things. So it's not to say that it's all bad. It can also be that there's an enormous drive in your day to day life, that you feel really motivated to get work done, to be more efficient at work. When we talk about the sixth house, it's also about colleagues or employees if you're in that position. And so Mars there can suggest that there can be conflicts or challenges with employees. So sixth house is not easy, always. It's not fun. We have to also recognize that life can be challenging at times. And so this is also a really good moment to reflect on what battles are worth fighting for you and which ones are not. So could you maybe philosophize a little bit more around issues at work or certain people that get your goat, or people who are aggravating you, and how could you find creative solutions to dealing with that? So Mars rules also your third house and your 10th house. And so this is even more significant because the third house is communication. And so we definitely, if you do have issues of conflicts with people, or anything that is coming up that might be around legal issues, or um, you know that are challenges, we could say life challenges, whether it be money owed, or contracts that have gone awry and that kind of thing. The third house will be energized, and so you can find real solutions, but keeping in mind that Mars is ruling the third house, and don't burn the bridges. Keep the communication open. Try not to generate difficulty where it doesn't have to be generated, and take care of any confrontations or anything that comes up with that energy of Mars, using the confidence of Mars, using the assertion of Mars rather than the aggression of Mars. It, of course, ruling the 10th house as well for you. That means that your career and your ambition is also very much sort of called into this energy of Mars in the sixth. And so this can really nourish your career. It can give you an enormous amount of drive in terms of your ambitions. It can be very, very helpful in terms of showing up, doing the work, and being seen to be doing the work. And just that one caveat, that you want to be aware that that martial energy can cause potentially tensions with higher ups, tensions with people in hierarchy for you at work, or even people in positions of authority. Don't get yourself in trouble with the law, with the police, for example. But nonetheless, a very, very productive time when Mars is in the sixth house. You can really plow through a lot of work. You can overcome conflicts with people by the sheer force of will, and potentially also by just avoiding. Mars in Cancer is also good at avoiding, evading difficulties, and that might actually be a good solution in certain cases. So good luck with all of this, Aquarius, and I'll see you in the next video. Capricorn, Mars is exalted in your sign, so Mars usually works out pretty well for you, except that it's happening in the seventh house, and so it's showing up across the way from you. And that means that you might find a lot of emotionality in your relationships. You might have to deal with some kind of um, upset or some kind of disputes in relationships. This is something that you can absolutely manage because you're usually good with that Mars energy. You're usually quite capable with that Mars energy. It can also bring about a lot of determination. If there is something that needs to be rebalanced or dealt with Mars going through the seventh, you're going to be able to confront that, able to deal with it. There may need to be some kind of separation or some kind of dissolution of something while Mars goes through the seventh, but you would need to see that in other ways as well. So you would need to see some signal that there is relationship trouble already, or that there's a desire for freedom that you might be experiencing. Certainly, after 15 years of having Pluto in your sign, certainly that has changed you and definitely changed your relationships. So maybe you're finding that there's just some remnants here that need to be clarified. It will help to clear the air in committed relationships of all kinds. Now, Mars also rules your fourth house of home, and that's also what makes you feel emotionally and psychologically secure, and secure within your family and literally at home in the physical home, but also what makes you feel at home. And so when Mars is being triggered in that way from the seventh house, this is a square. So there can be tensions at home. Maybe that's with reference to a relationship that needs adjusting. And of course, those tensions will feed back into you by opposition and square from the seventh house and the fourth house. So this could be something that you need to contend with, that you need to deal with. But as Mars also rules your 11th house, it's giving you a lot of energy in terms of your hopes and dreams for the future. And that 11th house is quite fortunate as well. It's a very helpful energy. The 11th house can be support from friends. It can be things that come up for you that lead you down a new path, a new direction. And so the changes that are going on here in terms of your inner psychology and in terms of your relationships and how people are showing up for you and how you're having to deal with those things, all of that is going to affect your social life in the 11th house, and then of course your future hopes and dreams as well. So certainly it's going to be a busy time. You're up for it, Capricorn, after what you've gone through. Honestly, I think you can just about go through anything, and you can certainly manage 7 weeks of Mars in Cancer. So best wishes for all of that, Capricorn, and I'll see you in the next video. Sagittarius, you've got Mars going through the eighth house right now. You're probably relieved to have Mars out of the seventh house, so anything feels better than 7 months of Mars in the seventh house. And so your Mars is going to really awaken issues that might have been latent. It might be things that you need to explore in terms of deep hidden patterns, psychological patterns, for example, some taboo issues that might come up, potential conflicts that might need resolving around shared resources. This is definitely not a good time to loan or borrow money if you can avoid it. If you do have issues around loaning and borrowing money, then there probably is going to be some kind of haggling or some kind of challenge around that, depending again on the rest of your chart. But that simply the Mars in the eighth house can challenge that. And then being in Cancer, that can be an emotional or psychological thing as well, where Mars in Cancer can bring up old issues around family patterns, and particularly in the eighth house, even issues that were ignored from childhood that caused you a certain amount of suffering, some kind of old memories that now you're able to find the courage to deal with. So this is actually quite helpful. By transit, Mars can give you a lot of courage in this area to overcome fears, to overcome things that maybe you didn't really want to look at before. If there is something to do with a shared resource like an inheritance or any kind of loans and this kind of thing, it would be good to step back a little bit, gain some perspective, try not to be too emotional around it because there can be disputes with family around things like that. There can be disputes with siblings or other members of the family around who gets what. For example, um, if this is within a marriage, then if this could potentially also be about a divorce or an issue that you might have to deal with within the marriage, which can also paradoxically have you both being unreasonable with your money, for example, like overspending, being careless with money. So, maybe not paying attention closely to your shared wealth and the things that you have in common, the money that you have available, and just be careful of that because then you might find at the end that you're actually arguing about money mostly because neither of you were really paying attention. So try not to be too extravagant. This is not a good time with Mars in the eighth to be extravagant. Mars rules your fifth house, and that's a bit of a risk-taking area as well. So that's another way of sort of asking you to be careful that you're paying attention, what it is that you are able to risk, and what it is that you're willing to lose, especially because Mars also rules your 12th house of loss. That 12th house is also unconscious processes. And so there's going to be a lot of churning here for Sagittarius. It's not to say that you're going to lose your natural enthusiasm for life or joviality, but it's really that you might be confronted with some things that really just need to be cleaned up. And that may have to do with ancestral or family issues. It may have to do with unconscious patterns. And of course, it may have something to do with financial issues. Loss can happen in so many different ways. The eighth house and 12th house also represent literal loss of people. It can be, somebody who passes, or that you're having to deal with grief of some kind, or having to deal with some kind of loss, possibly even because somebody's actually just moved away. It's not that the person is deceased, but that they no longer live near you, or you're the one that moved away and you're feeling that separation. When Mars goes through the eighth, especially there in Cancer, it's really the death of an old order of things. It's something old that is being regenerated, and now we're getting into a whole new phase. So look for that regeneration coming through that period of time from the 25th of March through the 20th of May. Look for ways to hit the reset button on whatever it is that's going on for you. This is definitely showing up for the US chart. For example, you might remember that the US has the ascendant in Sagittarius, and so this is similar to what the US chart is going through. There's definitely some old way of being that is being challenged and questioned, and it's a rebirth, regeneration moment. So do your best to keep your optimism going through this because I suspect that it's going to require your fortitude. And I'm not saying that to scare you, I'm saying that to prepare you. So, forewarned is forearmed, and that's why I'm telling you like it is. So, best wishes for all of that, Sagittarius, and I'll see you in the next video. Scorpio, Mars rules you. So, this is a really important thing to pay attention to. Always take a look at where Mars is going through the zodiac at any given time because that's your ruler. And this applies whether you're a Scorpio ascendant or moon or sun sign. And of course, with that Mars in Cancer in your ninth house, this is a lucky house. So there's a lot of really positive energy there for you. This is a really interesting time to be generating new ideas, to be investing in potential studies, or in a new way of seeing your life, a new way of seeing purpose. You might feel more driven to show up in a different way, or a renewed passion for what it is that you do. But it is a very fortunate house, and so there's a lot of energy there. This can have you also wanting to travel more, wanting to reach out into the world, do more in the big wide world. This is also super for your spiritual practice if you have one, and that's something that you can really develop with Mars in the ninth. You find the right teachers, you find the right motivation. This can also be really good for things like yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or karate. These types of practices that are physical practices that have a rooting in some kind of spiritual or a depth of tradition that brings more meaning than just throwing the body around. And so this is something you might want to develop, and especially because Mars also rules your sixth house, and the sixth house is the house of health. And so that can also light up your desire to get back in shape, or to stay in shape, or to really work on your health in some way. Um, and if there is a health issue that's going on, this can actually be really supportive for resolving that. It gives you drive and ambition around taking care of yourself, around showing up for yourself. And that's very, very helpful. So I think for Scorpios, given that this Mars is happening in a fellow water sign, this is a really beneficial transit for you. Keeping in mind, Mars is your ruler, and therefore, this energy of Mars. Cancer is going to make you perhaps confront yourself more in terms of how you feel about things than you're accustomed to. You tend not to want to look too deeply into your feelings. You want to keep those cards close to your chest, where Mars and Cancer might be asking you to open up a little bit more about that. And that can have you also reaching out to teachers or some kind of coach or some kind of authority that can help you and guide you in these questions that might have a psychological or an emotional foundation. So all in all, pretty good. Just stay away from the law. Don't get into trouble. Mars in the ninth doesn't always bring the best results in terms of litigation, if there is any need for that. And if it's something that somebody else started, well, you'll just have to deal with it, but certainly don't do it on your own. Don't cause yourself unnecessary trouble. So on that note, Scorpio, good luck with the Mars in Cancer, and I'll see you in the next video. Libra, ascendant, sun, and moon. Mars is in your 10th house. This is a square, so you're another cardinal sign, just like Cancer and Capricorn and Aries. And so this is really significant because it's happening in a fundamentally important angle of the chart, the 10th house. This is how you show up in the world. It can make you feel more ambitious. It can make you feel like you want to be seen, you want to be noticed more in what you're doing. This can be really good for career drive. You just have to be careful of not overdoing that, not elbowing your way to the top and getting your colleagues ire up and getting them annoyed at you. And also being careful not to generate any kind of challenge with leaders, bosses, and other people in the hierarchy, including authorities of all kinds, government officials, and things like that. Don't go and yell at the postmaster. But also because this is Mars in Cancer, it might actually be that you're not really usually standing up for yourself. You're maybe more accommodating than you should be. That, of course, depends on the rest of your chart. And if Mars is natally in Cancer, this might also be a problem for you, where you might find that you have difficulty actually standing up and saying, "Hey, I did that work," or "Hey, I need a pay rise," or whatever. And so, this can actually give you some juice, give you some energy to do that. And even if you don't have Mars natally in Cancer in the 10th, then that energy will be dynamic for you. It'll be something that you can draw on and really use this to your advantage in the next 7 weeks or so. Mars also rules the second house for you, which is all about money, your income. So this could be that you need to stand up for yourself and say, "Hey, boss, I need a pay rise." So keep that in mind. There might be something that you need to show others that you are doing this job, that you're showing up in a way that deserves more credit and maybe even more money in the bank. The second house is also your wealth in general. And so there might be this feeling that now you've got this drive, you've got this ambition that you're now determined to try and earn more money. You really want to develop your earning potential, or that whatever it is that you have been doing is now showing signs of working, and that will stimulate your second house of earned income. Keep in mind that the second house is also family, and so that can also have another effect, which is that there can be tension with family because you are showing up way too much for work, way too much for the outer world, and not enough for family. So that might be, in some cases, affecting you. This is also the case because Mars, of course, rules your seventh house. That's where we find Aries. And so there might be tensions in relationship. There might be some tensions where people are feeling a little left out. They're feeling like your ambition is costing them their private time with you, or their simple pleasure of being with you. And or maybe with Mars there, you're no longer pleasant to be with, and somebody in the family is going to tell you, or your relationship partner is going to tell you that. So listen to them if they say that. Make sure that you do pay attention to those messages coming from people, so that your drive for showing up in your career or in the world outside through your ambition is not also treading on otherwise wonderful relationships with people. So, nonetheless, could be really, really good for money, can be very, very good for career advancement. So, looking pretty nice. Just be careful to take good care of that seventh house of relationship while you're doing it. And I wish you all the best, Libra, until I see you in the next video. Virgo, this is happening in your 11th house, which is a lovely place to have a lot of energy coming in. This is about what you want for the future. It's about setting up long-term goals and what it is that you'd like to see. So maybe now you're going to start to feel this drive, a kind of a sense of what it is that you really want to see manifest in your life. It can also lead to some dynamism around groups. So if you are participating in groups, make sure that you're all on the same page. It's going to be challenging if you're not. So if you don't have a shared motivation, it can engender some kind of conflict in the groups and associations you hang out with, the friends that you hang out with. It's a good use of energy if you do sports together, for example, or if you have a really dynamic project that you're working towards all together, that will really be supportive. If not, if you're just kind of, doing the same old, then that Mars in there can make you pushy, or it can make you, people might find you a little bit too much at this time. Again, that depends on your natal chart, and that will depend on so many other factors around this particular transit and how it's showing up in your chart, Virgo. But nonetheless, it's worth keeping that in mind. Mars also rules your third house, which is where Mars can be a little snappy. It can be a little bit sarcastic. It can jump to conclusions. Mars in the 11th, by the way, can also jump to conclusions and think that it already knows what's what. So with Mars in the 11th and then also ruling the third, you want to just be careful of how you speak with people, and how you show up in conversation, how you show up in terms of your thinking as well. Of course, that Mars is also ruling the eighth house, which is shared resources. And both the eighth house and the 11th house are money houses. And so, where you might be working with others to earn money, or where you might be um, using your wealth or using your income to help out other people, or expecting money to come from other people, there can be some complications around that. This is definitely not a good time to loan money or to borrow money if you can avoid it. It's not, it can cause some challenges there. Certainly not between friends. Certainly keep your friends and business separate, because that can provoke some tensions there. Ditto with siblings, given that that's also about the third house. So just keep that in mind. This Mars energy can be super dynamic, but not necessarily bringing you the results that you want. There can be a lot more effort required to get the results that you want, or there may be some conflict that you have to work through to get the desires that you to get things to work out as you want. But all in all, with Mars in the 11th, it can really be very good in terms of your desire for what you want in the future. All of those, the idea of what you aspire to in your life is really going to be served by Mars there. If you can just manage the tone and the way that you converse with people, the way you communicate your message, and keeping in mind that you want cooperation through the 11th house. You definitely want to work with teams and build up potential cooperation rather than sowing kind of discord or doubt or conflict. So, of course, if that's coming your way, you have to deal with it, but otherwise, don't stir it up. So, Virgo, make the most of this energy in the 11th house. It's something that you can really benefit from. And so, I wish you all the best, and I'll see you in the next video. Leo, this is happening in your 12th house. And so Mars in the 12th house can be super aggravating. I can attest because I've just had 7 months of it with Mars in Gemini. Mars in Cancer can have you feeling potentially a little bit emotional. You might be feeling that there's quite a lot going on behind the scenes, and you might feel that you'd actually like to be left alone for some of this time. This is going to be 7 weeks, and of course, you're going to say, wait a minute, I'm a Leo. I'm not supposed to be alone. But, we all have times where we benefit from switching off, from moving into the shadows a little bit and trying to figure out what's what. And this is also especially true because Mars also rules your fourth house. And so that's about your what makes you happy. It's your psychological nature, it's your family and your childhood and the root of your chart, whatever makes you feel secure and stable. And because Mars is triggering this, by extension, you're going to have potentially, a need for that to settle down or be resolved in some way. This can also have something to do with a loss of some kind. It could be a loss of an individual, like somebody that you love, or it could be a financial loss, and that might require a little bit more contemplation, a little bit more time on your own, so you can put things back together in your own way. It's a good time to go on retreat. It's a really good time to make use of that energy and step back and do research, for example. Mars in the 12th is fantastic for behind the scenes research, behind the scenes preparation of something. If you're writing a book, for example, you'll get a lot done. If you need to do research for your work, this is a really good time to close the door and just get your head down and do all of that. Mars also rules your ninth house. And so that ninth house energy, which is about higher learning and education, spirituality as well, just as the 12th house is as well, could also have you much more in tune with a sense of higher purpose in your life. And whether that be academic or spiritual, either way, it's something that Mars can give you a lot of energy for. And so there can be some really great moments with this kind of energy, some real super realizations that will help you. Mars in the 12th can also help you see where you are your own worst enemy, where you are realizing now, oh wow, that was me all that time. And that's fantastic because you're going to see that you grow immensely with Mars in Cancer over the next 7 weeks. And that especially in the inner domain. So I think sometimes you might even think that people don't even realize what's going on beneath the surface with you in the next little while, but you'll find it a very enriching time. So make the most of all of that, Leo, and I'll see you in the next video.